Our next presenters are Professor Hodges, who is going to update us on the state of the economy, what lies ahead for the balance of 2024. He will tie in his predictions on the likely impact that this will have on corporate giving. And we're really fortunate this year to have two brilliant minds. Not only is Professor Hodges with us, but he has brought along a friend, James McCafferty, who is the director at the College of Business and Economics. Both of these gentlemen are with Western Washington University. Thank you for being with us this morning and welcome. I want to tell our attendees a little bit more about these two amazing gentlemen. Hart Hodges is the director of Western Washington University Center for Economic and Business Research. He received his PhD in economics in 1984 from the University of Washington. And while at the University of Washington, he received awards for both undergraduate and graduate teaching instruction. He taught economics from 93 to 95 at the University of Puget Sound, and then served as the Natural Resource Damage Assessment economist for the U.S. Department of the Interior. He has spent several years working with an economic consulting firm in Alaska. He joined the faculty at Western in the fall of 2000. His research interests include natural resource and environmental economics, health economics, and applied business economics. Professor Hart received a Dean's Research Award in 2009. He's active in various community groups as part of his responsibilities as the director of the Center for Economic and Business Research. Now, a little about James McCafferty. He is the director of Western Washington Center for Economic and Business Research. In this role, he seeks to broaden the connections between the university, the College of Business and Economics, and the real world, businesses, nonprofits, tribal communities, and government agencies. And he does this through student internships, classroom-based projects, and consultative projects drawing on faculty, staff, and students. James has an MBA from Western Washington University, a Bachelor of Science in Journalism and Public Relations from the University of Oregon. Apologies to the folks from Oregon. And he's a certified global business professional, serves as an officer for the Seattle Economics Council, and is past board chair of the Association of University Business and Economic Research. So both of these gentlemen have an amazing amount of experience, credentials, and we're delighted they've agreed to share some of their knowledge with us. So Professor Hodges, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Joy. And Shelley, thanks for the support from Umpqua Bank. James, we're going to have to put something much shorter on the web about us.
Something like these guys. That'd be good.
So we're going to just jump in. We do welcome questions along the way. It can be a little bit harder in a Zoom if you want to unmute yourself and yell at us. James will, I'm sure, show you how to yell at me. So we'll.
And you can always use the chat as well, and I will be watching that very carefully, and I'll interrupt the good Dr. Hodges as well.
Okay.
And yes, we will make the presentation available afterwards. So if you need a little help getting to sleep tonight, you can review these later.
I think it might be helpful if our attendees did use the chat because we have close to 200 folks.
Okay, and James will keep an eye. So
okay.
One of the things we asked last year was sort of a quiz on what's the definition of a recession. And a recession has to be widespread across place, across sectors. There's this expression being used for the last 12 months or so about a rolling recession, meaning manufacturing can be in a recession, then housing, then something else. And it's technically not a recession. So we don't like the expression.
It sounds exciting though.
But we are going to talk about it at the end because we think it's particularly relevant for you. I mean, if you're thinking about corporate giving, one of the comments we've got late in the slideshow is don't think about corporate giving as a single box, because one corporation is not like the rest. Joy, you mentioned a recession, and so if we're talking about a rolling recession, are we looking at one? So I've got some numbers from the blue chip consensus of forecasters. So the GDP growing, growth slowing, employment growth definitely slowing, unemployment still very low. I want to pick at these numbers for just a moment, because the GDP numbers suggest that the Fed has succeeded bringing inflation down without triggering a recession. We want to dig a little bit deeper, because if unemployment stays really low, and 4% is low historically, and inflation still above where the Fed wants it to be, which is 2%, we're going to have some challenges. And we want to play with those challenges, because the most forecasts that you'll look at, whether from large banks or National Association of Business Economists, the flavor is the same. 2023, much stronger than everybody expected. 2024, 2025, slower growth, a little bit of softness.
Isn't that where the discomfort comes from, Hart, though? It's slow. We've slowed the velocity of the economy, and now everyone's getting car sick.
Well, and we want to talk about why slow doesn't feel better in some ways, or what are the risks to slow. So we want to, rather than just repeat the same forecast, we want to pick at it and play with it. And then ultimately ask, what does it mean for you? So wage growth in the US moved up with inflation. And I'm just showing this graph because if wage growth is still 5%, James, if you're going to pay me 5% more next year, that's the wage growth. What else do you do?
Before we get there, Hart, there's a good question. The basis of the projections, and I'm guessing, Kevin, your question is the previous slide. Those are projections by a group of national economists, the blue chip economists. So those are projections. Those aren't actual numbers. What's ironic is the numbers in 2023 are not actual numbers either, because we don't have the last quarter's worth of complete data yet from 2023. So in the world of economics, we forecast the recent past to get to the recent future. So it gets fun. We get a lot of data revisions, and I think we'll talk more about data revisions as we go here. Okay, Hart, back to your question.
I'm just saying that if companies are having to pay workers more and more, to the extent possible, they're also going to raise prices for whatever it is that they're selling.
Wait. So you're saying that companies will raise their prices if they have to spend more money to get their product to market?
They'd better.
Huh. Do they raise it dollar for dollar, Hart, or do they maybe say, oh, well, it costs us $1 more, we better raise our rates $2 because it'll cost more later?
Either because it'll cost more later, or because of under cover of inflation, I'm going to raise as much as I can.
Shocking, I say.
So that is part of the reason inflation. So the bars are just the different inflation CPI readings. The dark one on the far right was March, right? The numbers just came out on Tuesday. And you can see inflation was coming down, down, down. Now it's gotten volatile, stagnant. You can pick your favorite word.
So I read an interesting article on this from Jay Powell, the other day.
Wait. And everybody can now see that we don't always prep together. What article did you see?
That one right there.
Okay.
I also saw another one, though, that talked about how Powell thinks that it is insurance that's actually causing a lot of the stickiness in inflation right now, because insurance premiums have gone up so sharply.
So we've got people spending more on services going up. You've got inflation, insurance hitting cars, homes, etc. So I think we can talk about that. The risks to inflation staying high can be climate or weather related, and that ripples into the insurance. It can be supply chain. It can be geopolitical. Right? So, and inflation's not coming down as fast as some people wanted. So people like Jamie Dimon, who does not run the Fed, but they might listen to him a little bit, says don't cut. And we've got a couple of sides, because most people want lower rates because it helps the stock market, or I can go buy a car more easily, or my mortgage will come down, and so on. But if the Fed is going to be sure that inflation has actually been tamed, they need to see different data than we've been getting in February and so far in March. Then this bottom little tag from the same article from Jamie Dimon on Tuesday was saying, most folks are really confident about a soft landing. He says he's not as confident, maybe half as confident, which puts him below 50% feeling about a soft landing, or above 50% for a recession. And the worst case scenario is stagflation, where the economy is stagnant with inflation. And that's problematic, because what you would normally do to try to slow inflation hurts the economy. And if the economy is already weak, you don't want to do that, and so on and so forth. So this tension, we think it plays out with the federal funds rate, and that's the rate that the Federal Reserve controls, and it ripples through other rates or influences other rates. We think you'll see rates, the first rate cut in June, and then probably 2 more cuts in the balance of the year. That's very different from the expectations at the very, very end of 2023. People were saying, oh, we're going to see rates starting to go down no later than March. We're going to get 6 cuts over the course of the year, and the stock market was off to the races. It's still off to the races, even no matter what the news is, and that's a different story. And then I put in yellow something we had in the slides from last year, which is rates will come down, but they're not going to come down to where they were for the decade prior to COVID. That matters for you in terms of corporate giving, because if you think about, and we've got a slide or two that talk about the relationship between the stock market and to an extent the economy and giving. If you think about how much the stock market is up over the last almost half a dozen years, 11% a year, and adjusted for inflation, which is remarkable. Driven in part by tax cuts and very, very low interest rates. And neither of those are going to be present going forward. So one thing I want to make sure I get on the table for you is, what budgets do you set? What planning do you anticipate for corporate giving? Is I think the good money is on a much softer stock market for the next decade than the prior decade. And that's worth thinking about. But I'm getting ahead of myself. James, I want to ask you about real estate. And I can start thinking, I've got a slide or two. Why haven't higher interest rates caused problems? And we can talk separately about residential and commercial. What's
Well,
your
residential, the real thing that's kind of the problem or challenge, opportunity in the residential market is the volumes are really low. And so not as many properties are being listed, not as many are being sold. And so it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy there.
And in part, in 2021, when mortgage rates were 3% and below.
We did 4 years worth of mortgages in 1 year, essentially.
Was it 4? I thought it was 3, 2 or 3. Anyway, everybody refinanced. So the graph on the right, it shows who has what mortgage. And you've got most people at 3.5 and below, or 3.75% and below. So the Fed starts raising interest rates. It pushes mortgages up. And everybody says, I hate my house, but I love my mortgage, because the mortgage I have is affordable. The mortgage I can get is scary. Ignoring the fact that 6.5% mortgage rates are fine if you look historically. And those of us are old enough in the room to remember house hunting in the early 80s. 6.5 would have been magical. But the Fed has not had the impact on the economy by raising rates the same as it normally has. And James, you've talked a little bit about what happens to these homes with 3% mortgages, say 4 years from now, 3 years from now, as the rates do come down a little bit and you start to get a little movement in the housing market. What do you think is going to happen?
The expectation is that many, I'll use the word many instead of most. Many of these homes will not go to sale. They will go to rental. And so you have a lot of people that at these 2, 3.5% homes, which is the bulk of the market, those homes are not really expected to go back into the market. So we go back to lower inventory volumes, nervous real estate agents to work through. I read an interesting article this morning about how interest rates are affecting divorce rates. That people with low interest home loans are not getting divorced. They're just living separately in their homes because they cannot afford to separate their finances at a higher interest rate, which I find fascinating.
I may have to ask that when I get home tonight, if that's why.
It's probably a good idea, actually.
All right. So on the commercial side, this was a graphic from an article in Bloomberg last fall, early fall. A survey of developers, large fund that own a lot of commercial real estate, and they said, when will the pain hit, right? Because people were saying, wait, we're now into halfway through 2023. The anticipated problems that high interest rates should cause in the commercial space haven't happened. What's going on? Why haven't we seen problems? And it was the same story as residential. The borrowers and the builders and developers had locked into the low rates as best they could. The issue is that in the commercial side, you don't lock into a 30-year fixed mortgage.
No, you lock into a short-term interest-only loan.
So 5-year loan, maybe I locked in 2020, 2019. I locked into a 5-year interest-only loan, and I love it because it's so low. So they said the survey response was essentially, when are your loans going to come due? When do you have to refinance and work with the new numbers, new interest rates? And so the comment was, if interest rates stay high into the second half of 2024, we're going to have a lot of problems.
Well, okay, so there's two pieces to this, right? So a vast majority of commercial property paper has to be rewritten this year and next year. So we got a lot of money in the banks trying to shuffle through, and banks are playing let's make a deal because they don't want the property. And so I mean, they're going to wind up with some of it, but not massive. And the banks have huge financial reserves. So we're not talking 2008. We don't have those kinds of issues. So it's not a banking problem. What it's going to become a problem is these people that are owning these buildings, or I should say operating, the bank owns the building. They're operating the business inside these buildings that they're going to have to adjust their business model. And so, Kevin, you ask a really good question here about how does pandemic office closures, that is part of it, but it's not the closures as much. It's how businesses have chosen to reopen, right? Are they doing hybrid? Are they doing all in the office? Have they decided to go
Here's a slide for Kevin.
Yes. And so you can see here where, okay, so when we talk about what I hate the term, but typical white collar type jobs, so lawyer, tech sector, etc. These are office buildings with key cards, people come and go. And so you're at about a half nationally, well, within this 10 city average, you're at about half, and Seattle's actually a little bit below these kinds of numbers, is below the national average slightly because of the tech jobs that we have in our region. And so office occupancy is down. And so companies are really rethinking how they're going to use that space and how much they're willing to pay for that space. So you have cities looking at changing how they're going to use that commercial property. Are they going to allow mixed use? Are they going to change it into retail, some form? Retail in these high areas are a little iffy because you don't have the foot traffic during the day. So we've got a lot of transformation coming in our downtown areas.
Well, I mean, so you've got, earlier we said interest rates moving up, interest rates moving down, but not until June. So we are going to get into the second half of 2024 with higher rates.
Yep.
And you've got that pressure with lower occupancies, and that makes for a giant experiment in a lot of downtown areas.
Well, and the thing that most of us consumers don't realize is that the bank was very willing to negotiate on interest rates. And
Right.
so a commercial lender comes in with their whatever, $100 million worth of property and says, yeah, I can't afford 6%, but I could afford 4. I can afford 5.5, 4.5. The bank is going to play let's make a deal because the bank has absolute control over that interest rate.
And we had one banker tell us, like you're saying, all loans don't go at the current rate that you see in the newspaper, but we will squeeze as much as we can out of those. So it will be interesting to see who who does well and who doesn't in the refinancing of commercial space. And then how this experiment in downtowns across the country, right? Because you don't have as many workers. So that means you don't have as many customers in lots of restaurants and so on. Curious times. So an awkward jump. Sorry, I'm going to go from real estate to the stock market. This is just a graphic showing one possible measure of the broad U.S. stock market. So CRSP stands for the Center for Research and Security Prices. So it's an index of about 3,500 stocks that comes out of the University of Chicago's Booth School. All I'm trying to show is over the last couple of years, you see the dip in 2020, not the dip, you see the drop in the stock market as interest rates went up. And then this run up, especially since November, the right-hand run up. The story in November and December was, oh, it looks like we're going to have a soft landing and the Federal Reserve can start lowering rates. And in spite of all of the news lately that no, inflation's not dead yet, and it's going to take a while, the stock market has said, we don't care. And one graphic, and sorry to get nerdy with you here, but the most common way to think about valuations is look at the price of a stock divided by its earnings, right? Because if you buy Apple stock, you have a claim on the earnings of the company. Ta-da! So the PE, or the price to earning ratio. Back in January, the end of January, the PE ratio, looking at sort of the average price and the average earning for the S&P 500, was quite high enough that people were starting to say, the only times it's been this high was either during COVID, .com, or something else. It's gotten worse as we've gotten into March. And I put this slide up only because if I'm in your shoes, I want to look at, okay, the forecast is good. I'm going to plan accordingly. But in my back pocket, I better pay attention to some risks. And one of the risks is a stock market correction. Not a crash. We're not talking .com. We're not talking, right with COVID type crash, but a correction. Get these PEs back down to sort of the price of the stock is more in line with the earnings of the company. And then maybe not the same sort of growth that you see from 1990 to 2000, because that's partly interest rates, that's partly tax cuts, corporate tax cuts. And so there's a backdrop that I want you to think about. Good overall outlook, some risks for you to remember. James, you always want to talk about the yield curve, so I have a slide here for you.
The yield curve is amazing. It's such a good tool, Hart. I mean, it does a really good job of predicting recessions, right? I mean, when you look at these gray bars and the dips here, it seems to track really well.
And just for the people that slept through their econ class, the yield curve shows returns on bonds of different durations. And you would expect, since a bond is an IOU, you would expect that the yield on a short-term bond, say a 2-year bond, to be lower than the yield on a 10-year, right? If I'm going to borrow money from you for 2 years versus 10 years, one of those is going to have a higher rate. In this graph, every time the jaggedy line goes negative, it means the yield curve is inverted, which means that the yield on the short-term loan is higher than the yield on the long-term loan, which kind of makes no sense and causes problems in the economy because people start thinking very, very short-term. They stop making longer-term investments. And typically, the gray bars in this graph are recessions. So typically, when we've seen the yield curve invert, it's been followed by a recession.
Is that always true, Hart?
7 out of 5 times.
7
Right.
out of 5 times.
There
Outstanding.
have been times when we've had an inverted yield curve followed by no recession. Or the argument is when the yield curve inverts, it's typically followed by a recession, but the length of time from when the yield curve inverts to when you see a recession is variable. It's quite variable. We're now in the period of the longest inverted yield curve ever, and it's going to stay that way for a few more months. Hard to imagine that won't have an effect. I feel cheated. Where's my recession?
Where's my recession?
Where's
That
my-
should be the title of our talk. The
So
question here is there's projections about yield curves. I've never seen a projection of yield curve because it's actual data, but do you
well,
see
I mean,
projections?
the projections are typically with the Federal Reserve's dot plot, people guessing what the Fed will do, and that translates to when do I think the yield curve is going to flip back to normal. We've thought it's sort of interesting because if you look at articles about soft landing, there's always, prior to the yield curve inverts, there's no recession within 2 or 3 months. People start saying, yay, we made it. We've had a soft landing. It's all these articles about a soft landing, and then boom, the recession starts. And if you look at the one before 2010, it was quite a period of time. And all these articles right now about soft landing. And I'm back to Jamie Dimon's comment that he puts the soft landing odds at less than 50%. So maybe I haven't been cheated. Maybe I just need to be patient and I'll get my recession.
This reminds me a lot of weather forecasting in Seattle, Hart. I don't know. If you just keep calling for rain, eventually you get it right.
Well, I mean, as a forecaster, you can talk about magnitude or timing. Do not do both. Makes it harder.
So Eric is asking us there's a question in here, but also a really good observation. So in the past, companies had major layoffs. There was some fundamental problem with the company, right? They were laying people off because business was bad. They couldn't afford them, and they were doing that. And now it doesn't appear to be doing that way because companies that are even doing well, i.e. Microsoft, Amazon, are laying people off. And so you wind up with these mixed messages. So I think part of it is the scale of the layoffs because companies are always shedding, this is going to sound horrible, shedding employees. Amazon, for example, they fire a percentage of their employees every year by policy. If you're an Amazon manager, you're required to release X% of your staff every year, and then they can reapply. But the idea is that they're constantly retaining the very best of their employees, I guess would be the management perspective. So when you're looking at layoffs for new sponsors or increasing asks, you're going to have to look at their underlying business itself. What's going on? So for example, Boeing right now, Boeing's got kind of a little bit going on. Are they going to have challenges in their workforce? They're going to shift around their workforce, is my guess. We're going to see some changes in their underlying methods of doing business as well. And so you're going to have to look at the broader picture. When Amazon did their big layoff notice, 6-7 months ago, what was ironic was that they also released very quietly a report that talked about how many employees had been hired without actual authorization, and it was close to the same number. So you got to dig in. You can't just look at the headlines. You got to dig into the actual businesses to figure out what's really going on within the sector. Because if you look at tech sector, we actually have tech sector employment growth. It's not reducing. I mean, despite the layoffs, the sector itself is not shrinking. Some of the salaries might be shrinking as people move to different jobs and resort themselves into the labor market. But the sector itself is functioning fairly well.
Nationally, we talk about hundreds, sometimes hundreds of thousands of jobs gained and lost. Right, so it is always a very dynamic spot. Debt. One of the questions, and we talked about this last year, was trying to guess when does consumer spending slow. I mean, so much money was pumped into the economy in the first months after trying to understand COVID. PPP money, direct checks, student loan forgiveness, or at least delays, and so on and so forth. Employee retention credits. So a lot of the predictions of a recession in 2023 were, okay, when student loans have to start back up in September, people will really start running out of money and we're going to see a slowing in the economy, mild recession. And that was a common forecast, only hadn't happened. Part of the story is that some lower income folks, so think about the consumers in terms of those at 50% of the sort of average income and below, they're out of money. Higher income still got some of that COVID money. So the spending is hard to really understand, and predicting when does consumer spending really slow, because it's also true that just because I'm out of money doesn't mean I have to stop spending, right?
This is America. You don't have to stop spending.
Especially if I've had some student loan forgiveness and my mortgage is low, I'm more comfortable running up my credit card debt. So auto loans and delinquencies are up, credit card balances and delinquencies are up, and they're up. They're getting back to pre-COVID levels.
But it's more expensive though. I mean, the interest rates, underlying interest rates on credit cards are substantially higher.
And there's a type of, it's not really credit, there's a type of debt that is where there's no data. James,
wait, I can get my groceries with four monthly payments.
What were the statistics on retail shopping over the holidays and people buying and saying up four equal installments?
Yeah, it was significant growth.
No, there was
significant growth year over year.
Huge spike in that, and we don't know if people are late on those third or fourth payments. The data's not tracked the same way. But
and because you're not buying hard, durable goods like a car, there's that loss is taken by the lender typically. But I think it's nuts. I think it's nuts that I can go and order groceries and tell it I want to structure that my weekly groceries.
You can buy lunch on DoorDash in 4 easy installments. Anyway, so the so is all right. Slowing economy, but slowing is fine, especially given what we've had. We're really coming back to trend. Well, we're going to dip a little bit below trend, and then 2025 we're moving back towards trend. If you're looking at GDP. Unemployment still only in the low 4s, a couple of years out is the prediction. We're saying, look, there's some risks that could make actuals turn out to be a little lower. We've kind of got our Jamie Dimon hat on in that we're a little bit more nervous about consumer debt. We're a little bit worried about all the reasons inflation could remain sticky and what that means for interest rates, which means something for commercial real estate, the geopolitical challenges, and it doesn't have to just be expansion of Ukraine and something. I mean, the Houthis in the Red Sea, right? Shipping costs are already up. Stock market doesn't have to come down. We're just cautious. And so so what is, how do we make sense of that outlook for you? And we're not experts in corporate giving or charitable giving, but one of the things that we notice when we look at some of the data is the high correlation between the giving and GDP, some, but stock market and interest rates seem to be crucial. I showed this slide last year, and all I was saying was sort of the economy, it's the economy, stupid, or whatever, right? But I look at when we were looking for updates to this information, we didn't find much. We were talking about it more and thinking, the right-hand graph looks more volatile, but that's only because of the scale on the various axes. But changes in interest rates and stock valuations have a more pronounced effect on giving than just, oh, it's a mild recession. In 2022 and 2023, it's been the stock market, right? Because GDP has been fine. And you've seen swings in charitable giving, and it's because of interest rates. It's because of the uncertainty caused by interest rates, higher interest rates. And right now you've got a wealth effect with the stock market. If that changes, I think you'll see changes in giving. rather in a rather pronounced way. So giving by source, when James and I were talking about this graphic, we were struck in that bequests fairly constant, 7 to 9%. We would have expected that to be growing as you think about demographics, baby boomers, the amount of wealth that baby boomers have, and maybe there's education that has to be done in terms of what do I do with my required minimum distribution? I don't want to pay taxes. Well, right, there's charitable call it gifts that happen there. But maybe the bigger one is corporate. Why is corporate 6 to 5% not higher? And we wondered, is it because sometimes corporate or parts of corporate are 10%, parts of corporate are 0, and that brings us back to the idea of the rolling recession.
Hart, do we have a minute to play with that slide for a second? Because we had a question here from Kim that
The one before?
Yes, the one you're just on. So a couple observations here of this thing. First of all, companies give money in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
Sometimes it doesn't come out as a contribution from the company, it's a marketing expense, right? So that may not get tracked in the same way, or it gets done and from the company, but it's donated through a foundation, et cetera, that sort of thing. So it could be money's fungible, could be fueling part of that 5 and 6%. The other question that was here that Kim asked was how much changes in tax codes impact giving, and they can and they cannot. So, for example, we see individuals are the major contributor here. A lot of individuals can no longer itemize their taxes. So, does a change in tax code impact them? Probably not as much as consumer confidence does, right? So, in your prior slide, you talked about GDP and you talked about S&P. I'm wondering how much consumer confidence also dovetails into those magic pie ingredients. Jody wants to know about the 5 and 6% here. And so this chart here is just showing in over a 5-year time span the sources of contributions. So that's where the 6 and the 5% are coming from. Okay.
Can I move forward, James?
Yeah, go ahead.
So, I mean, I was jumping to the rolling recession, and this graphic was from first part of 2023 when that was early when somebody said, look, banks are in a recession, some commodity areas are in recession, tech's not, still strong coming out of COVID, industrials are actually doing okay. All right, so it was that you're going to see sectors some sectors in recession, not all, right? The definition of a recession is that enough of these are all in a recession together that the whole economy is contracting. And people are just trying to come up with a new idea. Again, I've said I don't like it, but it's meaningful, because when we think about trends in corporate giving, all right, so I'll jump to the bottom. Companies are providing disaster relief, or just the more small and mid-sized. You can't think about small and mid-sized companies as a group meaningfully. It's thousands and thousands of companies, and some are in sectors that are doing well, some are not. And having a sense of who's doing well and why, or what's the forecast for financials versus tech, so that when you're talking to them or working with them, you know where they are and you know how to connect with them. And if they're thematic issues, like they're prioritizing disaster relief, again, disaster relief, the disasters that affect banks are not necessarily the disasters that affect somebody, right? And some are climate risks close to home, some are global risks elsewhere. And having a sense of what those risks are in different sectors so that you develop a strategy that works that way would seem to me to be really, really important, especially given the forecast of things are fine, but keep an eye on these various risks, because it's not fine for everybody. It's great for some, not for others, and I think that dynamic matters. And I think if we think about the stock market growth being more muted going forward, you're going to have to be a lot more targeted and clear in that. So we're opening it up, and I say keep an eye on drivers of inflation or news that could trigger a change in the stock market. And again, correction, not crash, because I think those are some of the most important issues for you. The inflation means what happens to rates. That'll ripple through either commercial real estate or others, consumer sentiment. That's where I would focus. But this is also your chance to play Stump James.
Oh, they've been doing a good job of that. Hart, I think our commercial's the next slide. So I'm just going to say there's a very fascinating article out last night about the Black Rifle coffee company, which, whatever for that company, wherever you feel about them, they are facing huge backlash because some of their employees have donated to causes that don't align with the company's mission. And so now there's been a call for a boycott by some folks around their companies. These issues are going to be coming up more and more in the nonprofit world. Companies and their employees are going to be heavily scrutinized for who's funding what. And so if that's not something you're thinking about very actively, that may be a space you want to spend some strategic time. That falls outside of economics, so I don't have to have any good answers there. So the commercial I'm going to leave you with is please email us or let us know if there's something you'd like more information on. We also post a ton of information every day on social media. Follow us online. You'll get most of the charts and things you saw today. We are out of our social media stream. So it's a great way to kind of keep up to speed on what's going around the world. You don't have to read as much stuff as we read every day that way. But yeah, otherwise, thank you all for your time today.